say that before the primary election, our chapter sent a questionnaire to the two candidates for district attorney, the incumbent Jan Scully and her opponent. And if you go online on our website, which is a great website if you haven't looked at it, it's www.aclusac.org. And you can see those questions there because they really will give you the insight to what Abdi is saying about what happens in the county and how critical it is about what the district attorney decides to charge. And so I think that's basically all I want to say, except that I know Alameda County has made some great strides in reducing the number of death penalties they've sought. And so the affiliates website is a terrific source also for this information.
And if I could add something also, that, I mean, it is granted it's a tertiary intervention, but nevertheless, the Department of Corrections and Rehab has always had at its disposal the ability to use compassionate release for inmate patients, and it's profoundly underutilized. And they'll end up basically having an inmate patient in a coma in a nursing home with two correctional officers sitting there observing the person.
And we're seeing that also in the case where people are getting a life sentence with parole or long sentences with parole, that the parole boards are really not in any cases giving people that opportunity when they've done everything that they ought to have. So where there is discretion, we're finding that people are not using it, except the prosecutors who, where there is discretion, are using it to the maximum level to get the longest sentences possible. You had any questions?
Could you discuss the ACLU's position and involvement with the Citizens United case relating to campaign finance?
Sure. I'm surprised it didn't come up earlier. The ACLU has had for many decades policies related to campaign finance. And the general view of the organization is to be very protective of free speech. And that's a big part of what the ACLU does. Every variety of speech, in every instance, we try to do our best to protect. The national ACLU policy has been very protective of free speech in the context of elections and considering the political donations and the spending of money for a political campaign as a form of speech. And so that's the national ACLU's historic position. But this organization, as you can imagine, is made up of a lot of people with strong opinions. And at the ACLU of Northern California, we take a narrower view of political donations and campaign spending, and we support limits on campaign contributions and campaign spending, and a much narrower view of that than the national office does. But that said, the case that was before the U.S. Supreme Court, the Citizens United, was about a very specific set of facts. Citizens United was a nonprofit organization, not unlike the Sierra Club or the ACLU or Planned Parenthood or any other number of nonprofit groups. They had paid for and created a film that was critical of Hillary Clinton, and they wanted to broadcast that film in theaters throughout the country close to an election. And the federal campaign finance laws that had been passed a few years back were prohibiting it. And so the lawsuit was to permit them to be able to show their documentary about Hillary Clinton in the days leading into the election. The case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the ACLU filed an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief. So we were not the lawyers representing Citizens United, but as the case proceeds, the court lets other people bring in their point of view on the issue before them. And we believe that the way in which Citizens United was being prohibited from showing this documentary was a violation of their free speech rights. The court ruled not only on that issue, but on the much bigger issue of restrictions on campaign finance and political donations and the spending of private entities for and against candidates in a much bigger way than the facts of that case, which were about a nonprofit with a documentary. And the real, I think, the concern that people have about that decision is that if they had wanted to come to that decision, they should have had a trial where everyone could bring their information about the bigger decision, not that narrower decision. So the ACLU sided with the plaintiff in that case, the Citizens United group, but the decision that the court made was on a much bigger, broader issue of striking down all limits on spending in campaigns that we did not have before the court or had the opportunity to weigh on directly. So there are people though in the ACLU and really the policy of the national organization has been much more open about political donations than our offices has been. The national board has debated for hours and has just revised the policies to be okay with some limits on political spending and donations. But it continues to be a big topic that we'll be putting a lot of attention on.
Actually, I know everybody has different interests, in their lives and different, specific situations. One that comes to mind in mine is I have 3 boys and 2 of them have autism, so disability, issues have become, part of, what I'm involved with. And, among other things that I'm interested in. And wanted to know if ACLU has any involvement with that subject. And also, I kind of thought that, perhaps ACLU as an organization or, similar organizations could be a very good conduit of, connecting with these different groups that each have their own special interests and kind of, creating an umbrella to bring them in, as I know, in the gay community and the, civil, rights for the 3 strikes and so on. And perhaps the, disabled community can, also be kind of connected to this broader support because nowadays we really need more and more under the coalition to make any difference.
I'll need to talk with you more about the specific issues that you've talked about. The ACLU overall has worked over the years on the rights of people with disabilities and in particular the rights of people with mental health and mental illness or mental disabilities. Those have been big areas of our work, in particular looking at the way in which people used to be institutionalized and would just disappear into a black box and not have any public accountability or public voice for people who would be put into really pretty awful conditions and what was apparently care, but which was basically confinement. We do a lot of work in building connections between different organizations. But what we do find, though, is that sometimes we're working with unlikely allies, and we can't put all of our allies in the same room all the time on every issue. So, for example, we work very closely with the Catholic Church on the rights of immigrants, on the rights of people accused of crime, and also on ending the death penalty. But we disagree with the Catholic Church on a number of issues affecting lesbian and gay rights. So we do work very broadly. We try to connect people as much as we can, but we do really try to keep the ACLU free to work with all people on as many of the issues that we can work together on. And then when we disagree with a group, we also try to keep the disagreement civil and to try not to paint a broad brush of what their intentions are, because at the end of the day, people can disagree, and we need to have enough room in our society for that civil discourse. And we try to be a part of that. But I will be looking forward to learn more about the issues you raised, and I'll be happy to share my contact information so we can learn about what you're facing in your family.
One last question.
Recently, I received information about ACLU and us doing some work around separation of church and state. Can you share a little info on that relative to NCLB and charter? How that's coming together?
Okay. We call it separation of church and state, but really it's about freedom of religion and the idea that each person should be able to practice the religion or the belief that's their own without having it be restricted or imposed upon by government. So it's just to say that we really talk about it in terms of freedom of religion.
Okay.
In the public school system, there are a number of rules and laws that affect the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech for students. So most recently, we were able to pass a law which applies certain free speech standards that we've enjoyed in the public schools to the charter schools. So that may have been what you were referring to. But overall, the ACLU works very hard to make sure that public school students throughout the country are free from school-imposed religious indoctrination. And so that is everything from the case I told you about in Florida, where the school was just full of religious symbolism, to also the instruction of science. This is 2010, but we're still fighting in communities throughout the country, people who want to teach creationism in the science class. So we are working to make sure that students, the science is science, and then that families can work with children on teaching religion and faith issues. Of course, there's the study of religion itself, which can be done in school when it's presented objectively in a comparative way. So we're working in that issue more than we would like, more than we think we need to in 2010, but we still continue to do so.
Okay, with that, let's welcome and thank Abdi for coming here and sharing the perspective of the affiliate and honoring us with his presence here today.
Thank you. I want to thank my son Cyrus, because he listened to this whole time and didn't so he's going to get a good ice cream and Fenton's at the nut tree.
It's the benefits of having cake here too.
Whatever one's